Okay, welcome everyone. What I am going to do in this week's class is actually do some hands-on learning inside the Chumash. Okay, we did a little bit of outside preparation. That's mostly, we're going to use that for our Gemara learning. But before we go into the Gemara, which is a commentary on the Chumash, we first have to look at the Chumash itself. Now, what I've done here is I've used a combination of various great rabbis to create a table. And in this table, what we're going to do is we're going to put in the verses, and that will enable us to analyze the verses and understand what the challenges are to understanding this pasuk and this verse, and how we're going to have to need help from Torah Pit A to define very carefully these specific verses in the Torah. We spoke about many times this idea of the thought formula, which means the way communication works with human beings and with our Creator is that there's a concept that's thought about in the mind, and then it's translated or clothed in words and transmitted to another person. That person reads those words and recreates the concept. That's called the thought formula. When we communicate with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, with Hashem, we do the same thing. He created the world. He had a concept of what the world was going to look like and what it was going to do and what it was going to accomplish. He took that and he put it inside the Torah, and he gave us the Torah. So we have to take those concepts that he clothed in the words of the Torah, recreate them, and then understand what he wants us mortals down here to do and to accomplish in the time that we're in his wonderful world. Now, to do that, most people just do it organically and they just read, but two of our great rabbis, one called Yitzhak Compton that lived before the Spanish expulsion, and another great rabbi who lived around 1730 called Reb Moshe Chaim Besato, outlined the format of communication. And we started involvement with some of those books. And what I'd like to now do is take some of that learning and apply it to these specific verses. And what we're going to aim to do is to see how the Kodesh Baruch Hu communicates and how he unpacks his communication so that we can actually understand very specifically what he wants to do. Okay, so—
Can the Rav just give us a quick reminder of why we picked these two Pesukim? Is there a similarity between them? Maybe just a quick summarized translation of them.
Okay, I picked these two Pesukim because they happen to generate a lot of interest throughout the generation, starting with Moshe Rabbeinu himself and ending in the last generation with some of our biggest wise men, biggest rabbis of the generation. And it's their involvement in that piece which I would like to present to you in an orderly way. I'd like to guide you through how information is unpacked. Okay, now these two verses are the verses that is the central focus of their investigation. So what I would like to do is start with the verses and have you join me on a 3,300-year journey. I hope it doesn't take 3,300 years, but a 3,300-year journey of understanding exactly what these verses mean. Now, we picked verses which are very, very practical. These are verses that have to do with what we call some people call torts, which means civil law. When we as human beings own various properties, and those properties some of those properties have the potential to do damage. And we have to make sure to guard that our property that is necessary for the world to exist is handled properly. And therefore, we are told by the Torah exactly how to guard your property, protect it from doing injury. And in the event that it does do injury, we're told about the compensation that has to be given in such a case. Okay, so that's a broad overview of what we're going to do. But we're going to actually do things which are very, very unique in the sense that I haven't seen people actually present the information this way. Now, everybody understands the information and analyzes it, but because we live in the time we do, and we have such things as spreadsheets and Zoom, we're able to now visualize things which it used to be people would visualize in their mind, but we can actually visualize it on a piece of paper. And by doing that, I hope to bring people with a minimal amount of expertise and learning into an in-depth study of a text. So that's my challenge. That's what I've been working on for many, many years in my life. And it's my merit. I really believe that it's very important more and more that the Jewish people contact the Kodesh Baruch Hu through the Torah and understand how the system works in a rational way, not in an emotional way, but a rational way, to understand that the words of the Torah and the communication we have with our Creator is very, very clear. Okay, so how are we going to do this? We're going to take two Pesukim that talk about, as I said, property damage. Let's read them together. And then we're going to put these Pesukim, these verses, into this chart. I'll explain the chart, but let's first read the raw material, okay? I mentioned to many people, I tell people that we're observant Jews. So I play a pun on the word observant. And instead of meaning that we do what Hashem does, which is definitely true, but we have to learn how to observe carefully. In the world that we live in computers, they have this phrase called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. That means the data that you take in will produce results. The efficacy or the truthfulness of the data will produce the truthfulness of the result. Bad data, bad result. Good data, good result. So how do we collect data? Well, we observe. Okay, we observe carefully. And once we observe carefully, we can then take that data and start understanding great things with it. So let's first be an observant Jew. Let's look at these two Pesukim. I have them here. They're in Shemot, the second book of the Torah. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes down and he gives us what's called Mishpatim. There's a whole parsha called Mishpatim. It's a whole series of legal law, and there's two levels of it. There's criminal law and there's civil law. So we have laws that involve the death penalty, and then we have laws that go on between a person and his neighbor, which may involve monetary compensation in the case of loss, okay, or responsibilities and obligations that one neighbor has to another. So this particular section is talking about damages, the laws of damages, how to, what your obligation is to protect your neighbor from being damaged. And if in the event it does happen, what is your obligation to compensate for that damage? So let's look at these two Pesukim. We'll first look at them in English, okay? And then we will translate them a little. I'll translate them into Hebrew for you, and then we'll use our chart. So the first pasuk is in 23 to 33, pasuk 33. It says the following: and if a man opens a pit, or if a person digs a pit and does not cover it, and a bull or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall pay. He shall return money to its owner, and the dead body, which means the dead body of the animal, shall be his. Okay, that's the first verse. The second verse we're going to talk about, and I'm going to do the Hebrew with you also, and we'll put it in the chart. The second verse is not talking about a person making a pit, a hole in the ground, but a person who does not watch his animal. And what happens? If a man leads his animal into a field or a vineyard, or lets his animal loose and it eats in another's field, the best of his field or the best of his vineyard, he shall pay. Okay, so those are the two pesukim we're going to concentrate on. Now, let me show you my chart, and then what I'll ask you to do is to put the sentences, these verses, into my chart. Okay, what does my chart do? My chart makes a distinction between cases and laws. Okay, this parsha is called Mishpatim. It's a series of laws, as we said, both civil and criminal. So we're going to have a series of cases and their subsequent law. Now, if you notice here, the laws could be 1, 2, or 3. There could be a few laws associated with it, depending upon how many elements there are in the case. Now, here on the side of the case, in this red, we're going to divide the case into an actor. That's what we're going to call in Hebrew the poel, someone who's doing an action to someone else, or his property is doing an action to someone else. A pu'ula, which is called an action, So this is the actor, the poel. The action is the action that he's doing to whom? To the victim, which is called the hefel. And then there's going to be a result. Okay, so on the side of the case, we're going to have a person doing an act to someone else that's causing a result, which will result in a law or 2 laws or 3 laws, depending upon the case. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, so we have case and law, and in the case, we're going to have 2 people, a person who is doing something to someone else, and there'll be a result to the second person, and then we'll have a series of laws. Okay, ready? There we go. So if I ask you, and you can do it in English and then I'll do it in Hebrew because I know that people don't know Hebrew that well. But if I would ask you in verse 33, okay, could you tell me where the case ends and the law begins? Oh.
It looks like it begins with the owner of the pit shall pay.
Any other ideas? Agreement, disagreement?
What are you asking? What's the case? What's the law? What's the
agreement? We finally got a lawyer here. Do we have other lawyers in the crowd?
Yaakov just said that he disagreed.
No,
good.
I agree. I don't
disagree. He agrees. Great. Okay. I mean, not great, but that's good. We can know. Okay. Our wonderful lawyer. Yes. Where would you define, Josh, the case here?
The case seems to be if someone opens a pit and doesn't cover it, and something falls into it. That's the scenario, and after that is what the consequences might be.
Okay, so everyone seems to be in agreement that this is called the oops, not number 9, but this is called the case, correct? And I'll put a bracket here, and if you don't mind, I'm going to put here on the bracket here, and this is going to be called the law, correct? Okay, is that clear enough? So we're talking about a person who's opening a pit or digging a pit, and he doesn't cover it, and a bull or a donkey falls into it. That's the case, correct? Good. Now, what's the law? The owner of the pit has to pay. He has to return money to its owner, and the dead body shall be his. That's the law. Good. Notice that this is pasuk 33 and this is pasuk 34. Verse 33 and 34. Why would you divide 33 and 34 this way? If it's one verse, let's look at the Hebrew. The Hebrew is much better. I mean, of course, it's much better. It's written by Hashem. Okay. V'ki yiftach ish bor, if a man opens up a pit, o yikara ish bor, or he digs a pit, v'lo yichasenu, and he does not cover it, V'nofel shama shor v'chamor, and an ox or a donkey falls there. Baal habor yishalom kesev yoshiv lebalo v'amesi alo. The owner of the boar has to pay kesev, cash. He has to return that to the owner of the dead animal, and the dead animal is his. Okay. My question was, isn't this a funny place to put a new verse in between a case and a law?
Well, it looks like in the next verse, but that comes after that, it refers to he shall pay. So would that refer to what was already stated in 34 for another case?
Okay, let's, I have to go a little slower. You have to know, by the way, a little historical fact. The first people that created the printing press were not Jewish. And the first book, does anyone know that they printed on the printing press? Do you know what it was? It was the Bible.
The Gutenberg Bible.
That's right. It was the Bible. That was the first book that was ever printed. And the people who were in control of the media, which was the printing press at that time, were non-Jews. And it took time for the Jews to get into that industry. A lot of times it was it was part of cancel culture where they wouldn't let the Jews in. But the point is like this, that the Goyim, they were the ones that divided the Torah according to their understanding into chapter and verse. And then they would debate the rabbis. They would always call the rabbis in and try to prove to the rabbis that their interpretation was correct. So, for instance, they had a big debate. You might have heard about it with the Ramban in Spain, and the Ramban got a free ticket to Eretz Yisrael. Well, it wasn't actually free. He was told to leave after he won the debate. So it was not exactly a fair debate. But they were constantly trying to prove their points, and the Chachamim had to understand their system of chapter and verse because they control the media. So this is not a Torah breakdown. This is a breakdown of a Goyish breakdown, and you see it right here. It makes absolutely no sense to divide Pasuk 33 and 34. It's one sentence, the case in a law. But that's what happened. Also, they chopped, if you look carefully, the paragraph of Mishpatim, of all these laws, they chop it in half between chapter 23 and 24. So there's a lot of nonsense that goes on in their numbering system, but we were forced to accept it because they control the media and they control the printing press. People have often talked about doing it our way, but that would mean taking all the books from the time of the printing press and redoing the system. That would be a tremendous amount of work. So we leave it the way they did it. Okay, now, so these two Pesukim actually are really one Pasuk, 33 and 34, and they represent a case in a law. Okay, so now what I would like to do here is use my chart and ask you the questions of who is doing the action, what is the act, and what is the result. So let's do it without the chart. Here in verse 33, who is doing the action in the verse?
Interesting.
Person.
Yeah.
A person, correct?
Male
So there's
or
a person.
Right.
What?
A male or a female.
Oh, now there you go again. Okay, we'll see. What does it say in the Hebrew? Ki yiftach ish. Who is this person?
Oh, okay. I see. It's
Okay.
the English is improperly translated.
Oh, exactly. So now we're going to have to show you the limitation of our wonderful English language. Okay, so that's why I have the Hebrew with the English. There's no way out. I can just go so far with an English translation. Actually did some translation with my good friend Rabbi Sackton, and it's not an easy job to take a concept and reclothe it in another language, which was really not meant for it. So there's a lot of ideas that we say in English which are
Lost in translation.
Lost in the translation. Put it
But
that way. Okay.
Rabbi, the sentence number 4 says if a man. So why does 33 say if a person? Why doesn't it just say if a man?
Where does it say a person?
On 33,
Let's
and if a person. And number 4, just below the Hebrew, says if a man. And the Hebrew clearly states ish, referring to a man. So why are we going down this road?
Well, 100%. I mean, again, we have to define the terms in Hebrew, okay? Why the translator didn't say a man and said in a person, you'll have to ask him, okay? I can't be responsible for that. But we have to look at the text itself, okay? And here it says, Ki yiftach ish. So who is the person who is doing this action?
A man.
A man, correct? So it's a man that's doing an action. Now we have a big problem. What about if a woman does an action? What happens if a child does an action, right? We discuss these type of things. So we're going to have to discuss that. But here in the opening verse, it's talking about a man. And what is he doing? What is the action the man is doing?
He's creating a hole. He's creating a hazard, basically. He's digging.
Well, I would like you to stick to the words of the verse. You could do it in English. This is not bad. These words are okay.
Or digs a pit and does
that. So the action he's doing is opening a pit, correct? Now, what does it mean to
dig?
Okay. Or if a person digs a pit, okay? So he's doing 2 actions here, correct? Which the first action is what?
Either opens an existing hazard or he creates a new hazard.
That's correct. So there's 2 actions being done here. Let's look at the Hebrew. V'ki yiftach, when a man will open. Okay, yiftach means to open. Ish is a man. A bore is a pit. That's he opens it. That means it was already dug, and all he did was took off the manhole cover. Okay, that was covering it, right? Or ki yikara ish. Or if a man, here he is again, the man, this time he's digging the pit. So we have the man either takes the lid off the top of already existing bore, even though he didn't dig that. All he did was take the top off it. Or if he himself digs a pit, okay, that's so we have here the subject, meaning the one who's doing the action is a man, correct? What he's doing is 2 different types of activities. He's either he's uncovering the pit or he's digging the pit. Okay, so the object that the action he's doing is called uncovering or digging, and what he's doing that too is a pit. You with me? Good. Ki yiftach ish bor yikara bor. Now that's the first thing he does. Now the second thing he does is this vav means and. I have to tell you that eventually when we get together, we have to learn how many different types of sentences there are. The Ramchal defines 11 types of sentences. Vav's and sentences he calls a merubah inyanan, which means that you can take a lot of subjects and put them together, string them together with the word and. Okay, so here's the and, which is another addition to our case. The first part of the case was a man. What did he do? He either opened the pit or he dug the pit. Okay, now what does he do? V'lo yichasena. What does lo yichasena mean?
He doesn't cover it.
That's correct. Okay, so now here's the man again, the subject. And now he's doing a non-action. He does not cover the pit that he either opened or that he dug, correct? So again, it's the man, this is doing the action. He's doing it to a pit. The 2 actions he's doing is either uncovering it or digging it. But here, there's a third action. After he either digs it or uncovers it, he does not cover it back up again. Okay, so that's another condition. Now we have a third condition. What happens? V'nofel shama shor or chamor. What does that mean? And a bull or a donkey fall into it. So who is doing the action here? Well, let's start with the easy one. Who is the victim here?
It's the animal.
That's right. What type of animal?
A bull or donkey.
Okay, a bull or a donkey. Okay, that's the victim. Okay, what is?
I mean, wait, I'm not so sure. I mean, that's what the action's being caused on. I don't know if I'd call that.
I didn't say the action. I said the victim, not the action.
I don't know if a bull or donkey can be a victim because he's going to end up paying the owner. So.
What do you? Oh, but now we have to talk about victim. I'm talking about the victim of the damage. I'm not talking about the responsibility to pay.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so the victim of the damage is a bull or a donkey. What was the item of the action that the victim that happened to the victim? Put it that way.
Oh. Okay.
It died.
I'm talking about only. It's true. He may have died.
What is the question again? Sorry.
The question is, what action did this pit do to the bull or the donkey?
What action did the pit?
It killed, but it's a loss of commercial value to the owner. The owner's
Very good. He killed it, but wait, first of all, we don't know if he killed it yet. Second of all, I want you to be very careful about what's written in the text. Okay, we live on the words. Remember, we're talking. Hashem is talking to us. He uses language to communicate. So we have to be very careful in the words that he says. You know, we have a lawyer here. You know, you have all these little comments at the end of a contract with little stars and double stars and triple stars. Why do they waste all their time with all that little print? Because they're very, very careful to define their cases. So when the Kodesh Baruch Hu defines his cases, he's the best lawyer in the world. And we have to be very careful. So what action is happening to this donkey or bull?
It's damaged. It's damaged and ultimately dies.
It's falling. It's falling into the pit.
Oh, very good. That's what I want you to concentrate. You notice the difference between the difference? It's falling into the pit. That's the action that the pit is doing to the donkey, right?
How is that action that a pit is doing? An action that a pit is doing to a donkey is a donkey falling into the pit. You can say
excellent. Yes. How can a pit doesn't do anything, right? A pit is just a hole. So what type of action does a pit do? Well, what it does is cause people to trip.
Right.
It causes people to fall. So it's a causative, okay? So the pit is causing the donkey to fall.
Fine.
All right. If the pit wasn't there, then the donkey wouldn't have fell into it, right? Okay. So good. So now in my chart here, okay, this is how I define the case. Ki yiftach ish bor is the first part, okay? If let's put this in here, if I could do this. Okay. Let's see if I can do this, gentlemen. Okay. This first thing says, by the way, I give lessons also in Word as an extra benefit for anyone in the class, okay?
A rabbi teaching Word.
It actually, it was done very well, I must say. A lot of people don't know the strength of Word, but you can write whole books with it. It's pretty good. Okay, so here, and if a person, the only problem is here, I can't get this back for some reason. I don't know why. There we go. There we go. Okay, so the first part says, and if a person opens a pit, okay? So now if we use my chart, I say, who is the actor here? Well, he translates it as a person, right? Is that correct? You with me? But in Hebrew, does it say person? No, it doesn't. It says what?
Man.
That's right. We got to be careful. So the one that's doing the act here is a man, right? The action that he's doing is opening a pit. So the pit is not the victim per se, but it's what he's doing it to. In Hebrew, by the way, I use the word hefel. It just means that which is being acted upon. So really, in logic, I should say this is the receiver of the act. Okay. I have problems in these translations. Okay. So there's the actor, the person who's doing the act, the action he's doing, and then the person who's receiving. Okay. Now, is receiving the action. Okay. So we have a man. What is he doing? He's opening a pit. Okay. That's what he's doing. Okay. So I'm going to just, in English, I'm just going to cross all this out because we have the Hebrew there. And I'm going to put it this way.
Sorry, Rabbi, this is probably, maybe this is a mistake, but it says bar, it doesn't say bor. There's no vav.
Oh, very good. You're a Hebrew expert.
Okay. Becoming one.
Excellent. Good. Now you see you're becoming an observant Jew. You see, the word bor in Hebrew is spelled beis vav resh. So how come here it doesn't have the vav in it? Very interesting. Very good question. And okay. So we're going to hold that question on the side, and for extra credit, next time we'll give you the answer. Okay. But needless to say, it means pit, even though the vav is missing. Okay. So we have the actor. The actor is a man. He's opening a pit. Right now, what is the second condition here of this? We said.
Animal follows.
No, we have a man who's digging a pit here. You with me? Oh, Yakora ish. Okay. So over here again. Over here again, we have that person. Okay. Which we're going to call a man, not a person, because he's more technically called a man. And here he's not doing opening. What is he doing?
Digging.
No, he's digging a pit, correct? Mm-hmm. So now the action that he's doing is digging a pit. Wow. Okay, good. So Rashi asks a question. He says, wait a minute. If I'm already going to be obligated on opening a pit, so certainly I should be obligated on digging a pit. If I'm going to be obligated on a pit that I didn't dig, I just opened the cover, right? So certainly I should be obligated on a pit that I actually dug myself and didn't cover. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems like that we could make an inference off of the digging or the opening to the digging. So why did we have to teach both?
Great. Now, one of the rules we learned is that Hashem never wastes words. Okay. Everything is necessary. Nothing is extra. So when we see something that we could derive ourselves and Hashem spells it out, we say, ooh, wow, what does it come to teach us? It must be teaching us something new. Okay, so we're going to get into Rashi, Be'ez Hashem, and we're going to understand why Hashem wrote him the first case, opening the pit, and the second case should have been obvious, and yet he wrote it down, digging the pit. Okay, is that clear? But we can't do everything. I just wanted to, give you a preview of that. All right. So now we're not done. V'lo yichasenu says the Torah. What does lo yichasenu mean? He opens the pit. Number one. Number two, he doesn't have to open the pit. He can dig it. Okay. And then what happens?
Doesn't cover it.
Doesn't cover it. So who is the subject matter here? Who's the subject?
The man again.
There's our good old man. Okay. And I put him in brackets because the Torah didn't repeat that. What's the action he's doing?
Digging and not covering.
No, here specifically. You see, I want you guys to be observant Jews. Be very careful.
He's not covering.
Oh, you see, he's not covering, you see.
You're
Not
splitting it all up.
covering. Excuse me?
You're splitting it up. I would think dig and not cover would be one action, but
Yeah, I'm purposely breaking everything up very carefully. I'm training you, and this is the training that you have to do. Every word that Hashem writes in the Torah and every letter that he writes in the Torah is a absolute necessity and cannot be overlooked.
sorry, but how is not covering an action? That's not an action. That's a lack of an action.
Oh, very good. It's hard to call not covering, but we could say that it's an action of not doing an action. Okay, good. But it's a good question. It's a non-action, but it's a non-action, which is an action, because we'll see in 1 second. If he
Right.
doesn't cover it, if he
It falls into the category of like maybe like a negligence or something like that sometimes.
well, again, it's going to be negligence, right? By not covering it. What would happen if he did cover it?
Nothing would fall.
And therefore, well, what happens if an animal, if he covered it and the animal did fall, what would happen?
That's a good question.
What was your question? If he covered it, but an animal still fell in?
That's right.
That's a different case.
Well, it's a derivative of this case, correct?
But this case is, and he didn't cover it. So
That's right. And I'm asking you the inference from that case. Can you make an inference from this case to the case where he did cover it?
well, just to follow up just a tiny bit on what David said, this is just my lawyer hat speaking. I'm wondering, with these words here about big, what I'm wondering with my tort lawyer hat on is, are we talking intentional situation, a negligent situation, or really an innocent situation? I can see all kinds of scenarios here. The words that the Chumash is using for open and dig, is this scenario trying to tell us when someone is kind of intentionally doing this to maybe capture another animal? Is this person just kind of reckless or negligent, and they create a hazard like Zoller was saying, and they just fail to protect other people from entering it? Or is it a totally innocent situation where we could think of something where something happened and they really didn't realize it wasn't covered, and something happened beyond their knowledge, but they had no intention of doing anything harmful to anybody else? So I can think of different scenarios here, and I'm wondering what is any way to figure out what we're talking about here in this actual case.
Okay, excellent. Then I would like you to write down all your scenarios, because they're going to have to be addressed here, or else we haven't understood the parameter of the case. So please write down all your scenarios and anything else that comes into your mind. It's part of being the observant Jew. You have to see what's being said and what's not being said. Okay, and then we're going to have to understand, just like here, it says here in the case he didn't cover it. So I asked you, and what happens if he did? And you brought a whole series of involvement. Did he do it intentionally, unintentionally? How about where did he do it?
Right, on his property or on public property. Yeah, good.
Okay,
But let me ask. I mean,
doesn't matter.
I would say that the diuk, the inference you would make is that if he did cover it, he's not liable.
Okay, that should be the inference.
Right.
We'll see.
Okay, fine.
The inference is because again, the Torah now is defining liability. So any of these conditions have to exist in order for you to be liable. Now, if you don't have those conditions, it would follow that you're not liable. Okay.
Right, but we also have to have a definition of what covering or not covering means.
Oh,
exactly. What if I put half of a manhole cover on it?
Oh, very good. Now we're going to also have to define what's called a sufficient covering. Okay. to be out of this case. Excellent, excellent. Now you're becoming observant Jews. Okay, excellent, 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 excellent. So my reason for doing this is to show you the source material, which will force us to come on to the oral law. Okay, without the Torah Pit A, the oral law, there's no way practically to do the Torah. That's one of the reasons why the non-Jews that read the Torah in translation don't do the Torah, because they have no way of doing it. In the Torah, it says you should put on tefillin. They have no idea what tefillin is. It says put a sign in between your eyes. So why not just put the letter A here? Maybe it's the letter B. Maybe it's Yud Kei Vav Kei right over here. So there's no way to understand the Chumash without Torah Pit A. It's impossible without the oral law. Okay, and that's why I'm demonstrating this to you. But we always have to be observant Jew and say, what did Hashem write in the Torah? From what he says, what does that imply? And then we have to look at the Torah Pit A, which will define all these missing questions that we have. That's why I wasn't being facetious to you, Josh. You should write down all these questions, because these are questions that have to be addressed. Okay, I don't know if we'll get time to address them, but they really have to be addressed. And once you do this, this is what my Rebbe used to call conscious learning. Once you do this, and then you all of a sudden read something in the Mishnah or in the Talmud, you'll say, that was my question. And then you'll be consciously engaging in the text. Okay, so good. So here it is, the man is digging a pit. Velo yichaseno. He doesn't cover what? The pit again, right? Even I'm putting in words, usually I put in brackets, right? And now, what happens here? V'nofal shama shor v'chamor. So the victim is obvious here, correct? The shor v'chamor, right? That's the victim. And we would always say, whenever you have two items here, what's the question that you ask?
Why did it teach both and you couldn't infer one from the other?
You got it, friends? No extra words. Why all of a sudden the Torah talks about a shor and a chamor? Why do I have to know about both of them? Just in Hebrew, the word behema means animal. So just say animal. Or why do you have to specify an ox or a donkey? That's extra words. Or if you want to just pick a classical case, pick one or the other. Okay? Extra words. Now, everyone jumped here and presumed that the result of this negligence, we'll call it that, is that the animal died. But does the actual result appear in the words of the Chumash?
If you can take the din, the law, back to the case, then I would say yes.
Okay, do you hear what David just did? I want everyone to catch that. In the actual case, it does not tell us what actually happened to the animal. It just said that the man opened the pit, or he dug the pit, and he didn't cover it, and a bull and a donkey fell into it. It doesn't say, and he died. It didn't tell us the result, or he was injured. It doesn't tell us the result. Okay, so the way we're going to have to now understand the result is what David just did, is to look at the result, look at the law part of it, right? Okay, because at the end it says the dead body shall be his. So it must have been that the animal died. That's an inference. Okay, so we could say that the animal did die because we know that he's going to have to give the dead body has to go to either to the owner of the animal or back to the person who did the damage. We're going to have to discuss that in a second. Okay, you with me, guys? All right. So good. So now all this is called the case. In order to have the following law, we need all these conditions. Okay, you either have to open it, the pit, or you have to dig the pit, and you also have to not cover the pit. You have to have those three things. And of course, there has to be a victim here, or else there's no case. Well, can I take you to court because you opened a pit in the public area? Interesting idea. Am I allowed to open up a pit? Well, I just said it was a public area. I don't know it's a public area. If I make a damage and no one gets hurt, am I negligent? Interesting question.
What does that even mean? Seems
Let's
like
say I say I dig a pit in the middle of the highway, but everyone sees it and no car gets into an accident that day. Have I done
that
something
doesn't
Okay.
wrong?
sound like a
There's no
damage.
case.
What?
Yeah, that's what
No-
Josh is right, I think.
Well, what? What do you
No
want to say?
case. Something has to happen. You got, everything has liability and damages. If you do something and nothing happens, then nothing happens.
Mm. So now we have a very interesting idea here, which I'd like to present. Is that it's true here? We're talking about mishpatim, which means that as you said, if there's nothing happens, there's no litigant, no one claiming, then the court doesn't get involved. However, there is a higher court in the Shemayim. That means Hashem says that if you create dangerous items, you could be liable for a sin, if not liable to pay. Interesting idea. I'm not
Is
taking a
that,
position.
sorry, Rabbi,
That's-
is that the difference what David Zoller was pointing out of like halacha versus like ethical? Like,
Yes. Now, I'm not taking a stand on that because I really do have to research that.
Yeah.
The question is, did you do an avera by making a dangerous item in the highway? Will Hashem say it's true that we can't take money from you in a legal situation of a beit din? But on Yom Kippur, do you have to say, please Hashem, forgive me for making that hole in the public area?
well, it depends if there's a commandment that you can't build something dangerous, and because we know that you have to put a fence on top of a roof. So if no one gets hurt, you still didn't do the commandment that you're supposed to build the fence and keep it safe. So in terms of liability to Hashem, I think yes, doing something dangerous.
Okay, so now you brought a very interesting case of the makeh of not putting a guardrail around your roof. Now, could we use that as a source, or is there some other source which tells us you're not allowed to create hazards to create hazards like pits in the middle of the street? Interesting. I'm not taking a position yet. I'm just being an observant Jew and bringing little observations here. Whether the observations lead us to a avera or not, that you'd have to ask for forgiveness on Yom Kippur is a very interesting question. But I just bring
It's only another legal addition here. It's only
very good.
it's only a hazard if there's likely exposure. In other words, if you dig this in an area where there's likely to have people around and people might, encounter the hazard, and maybe, there's a potential for some animal or person to fall in, obviously there's potential exposure. If you own 1,000 acres in the middle of the desert and you dig this pit in the middle of the 1,000 acres and there's never ever been anyone there, then there's no reason to expect that there would be any exposure of anybody. And
Very interesting word, exposure. Very interesting word. So, but as a lawyer in the group here, can a person be brought to trial because he put a hole in the public area?
let me give you
Even if no one gets hurt.
right, correct. And I think the answer is, well, let me just rephrase your question. Your question was, can someone be brought to trial? Anybody can be brought to trial for anything. I think what you meant to ask perhaps was, can they be held liable if they're brought to trial?
Okay. I mean, anyone could be brought to trial. I don't know about that. There are parameters of what you're allowed to do.
Let me give
But whatever it is, yes.
Yeah.
A person dug a bore in the middle of the street, and now is there someone responsible to say this guy is doing something? He's created a hazard. Now, no one has gotten hurt, but he has created a hazard. Is there someone that can step in and say, we're going to take him to court and tell him to fill up that bore? Or no, we have to live with it. What do you say, Josh? What's the legal opinion?
The answer is yes. The person can be required to deal with the hazard even if no one has fallen in, because there's potential for exposure. You don't have to wait for someone to get hurt if there's potential exposure. If it's in the middle of a street where people are likely to fall in and they happen to, thank God, catch it before someone or some animal falls in, then yeah, absolutely. If there's a likelihood of potential exposure to that hazard, then that person can be required to fix it even before someone or something falls in there. I think that.
Who, can I ask you, who brings such a case? Does someone have to bring that case to the?
Sure. For example, I do a lot of safety work with safety agency called OSHA. You may be familiar with OSHA. And if there was a hazardous pit on a work site, for example, and it was observed and by let's say someone who's trying to enforce the safety rules, and they would be obligated to eliminate that hazard when they realize that it existed even before someone fell in. They absolutely do not have to wait for an injury. And of course, they shouldn't wait for an injury. We don't want to incentivize people to only eliminate hazards once a terrible accident occurs. They need to be aware, and they need to be observant Jews looking around for potential hazards and eliminating them before, God forbid, something happens.
Okay, so what I was asking you, who brings such a case?
Well, and in that instance, it would be the agency who's trying to enforce the laws, or perhaps a safety consultant from the company, or someone like that. It's so I guess when you say bring a case, it's are we talking about in a court? We're talking about in Hashem. We're talking about simply enforcing a law. Like you can require people to do things even outside of court, but that's kind of what I thought is
Okay, so now we're going to have to discuss this in Torah law. You see, am I allowed to dig this pit in the first place, even if no one gets hurt? Here we're talking about that someone does get hurt, and it's talking about the consequence of that damage. But do I have what's called an Isur? Is there a prohibition of creating a hazard?
Rabbi, I wonder if in Josh's case, he's describing maybe a safety consultant or someone on site in the workplace. It would seem that they're going to see this hazard. They probably have to eliminate it immediately. They probably become like a shomer in essence, like a guard, because they're responsible for and then you'd make the person who built it have to pay. He would bring the safety consultant, bring the case back to get reimbursement, but he would probably be responsible not to let it stay there.
Okay, so let's leave this open. It's very interesting because we're bringing in practical civil law. Baruch Hashem, we have Josh here, but we now want to interface that with the Torah law. What would the Torah law say about it? What are the powers of the Beis Din when it comes to enforcing safety regulations? For instance, we've had some terrible accidents here in Israel, one in Meron and very recently in Karlin. And the question is, who is responsible not only for the damage, but in charge of making sure that those things don't happen? Okay, and did the people who did it, were they transgressing the Torah law? Okay, very interesting questions we have to ask. Okay, but
right,
now we're going to.
I just want to say that it sounded like we said if somebody built a pit and it has no exposure, that if you do it in the middle of the desert, that there would be no liability. I could think of a case where there actually would be liability, Rabbi.
Okay, now one of the things that we have to discuss, and that's why I just brought up the question, is the limits of place. In other words, what am I allowed to do in my private property, in public property, in a desert which is not owned by anyone, in a public street which is owned by the public domain? So we're going to have to now place this law into those contexts and probably other ones that we didn't even think about, okay? But I'm just, again, I would like you to open up the questions here. I'm just trying to observe the reality and try to feel a little bit the parameters of this law, okay? And we will get into, well, we won't get into that so much, but at least when you learn Baba Kama and you start seeing the explanation of these pasukim and going into these areas. I remember that. I did that with Rab Chaim Shulkovsky. We discussed that point. Okay, very important, conscious learning. Now, let's look at the law here, okay? Okay, let's look at the law side, the legal side here of the law. So here in the Hebrew, I put here, Baal Habor Yishalem Kesed. What does that mean? Okay, the owner of the pit, look at that. Look at how they translate that. That's a terrible translation.
What translation are you using, Rabbi?
I got this from the Chabad site. Nothing personal, but I just copy and paste it from the Chabad. I can't do that myself. But you could look at your any English, look at Art Scroll, maybe they translate it better. I can't say. I just copy and paste, But here, look what it says here. Here, this is the translation, right? What is the translation? Yeah, David, what's the translation? Your language.
No, Yaakov's our language guy.
Okay, no, I mean, no, in English. What does it say in English?
Owner of the pit shall pay.
That's what it says in English, right? The owner of the pit shall pay.
Right.
What does it say in the Hebrew?
In the Hebrew, it says kesef.
It says that the owner of the pit shall pay cash. Kesef is silver.
Ooh.
Doesn't say that here. Why did they leave it out?
Interesting.
Okay. The answer is they're trying to just give you the flavor of, they can't, they can't give you more than that, because if you say the owner of the pit shall pay silver, you'll say, what's silver? Okay, maybe you should say cash. Oh, really? They had cash in those days? What's cash? Bitcoin, you know what I mean?
Just
So,
a
I mean, okay.
2-minute warning. We have a 2-minute warning.
Okay, so here it is. The owner of pit shall pay silver. That's one law. Yashiv l'ba'alav. What does that Yashiv l'ba'alav mean? He shall return. And here he put the money in all of a sudden. Look at that. Look what you just did. Does Yashiv l'ba'alav means he should return money to its owner? Look what's going on here. Wow, there's the money. It popped up. I spoke too early. You know why? They're trying to make English sound nice. Okay, but here it says, he shall return money to the owner. It doesn't say that. It just says, Yashiv l'ba'al. Yashiv, he shall return to the owner. The owner of the pit shall pay kesef. He shall return to the owner. That's what it says. Okay, but it doesn't make too much sense in English. And what's the third din here? And the dead body shall be his.
Who is his?
Oh boy, you got inside information. Who is his? Does it mean the person who did the damage gets the carcass and has to pay the difference, or does it mean the owner of the animal keeps the animal?
And one more thing, the rabbis seem to say that the way that I said it, that you could take the din back to the case, was correct, but this could just be in a situation where there is a dead body where it does die, that one of them gets it.
Okay, then the Torah should have said, and if the animal dies.
Fine.
Right?
I think it's the owner of the pit, the person who created the problem, pays silver to the animal that was injured or died, or person that was injured or died, and that once they pay, they're responsible for that, and they also receive that dead animal.
So he's being rewarded for killing the animal by getting the animal.
He pays the difference. He gets a $20 coupon rebate.
So say the animal was worth $100, right? And the dead carcass is worth $20, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how much does the digger of the pit have to pay to this poor owner of the animal?
$120.
120. 120 has to pay even more than what he did.
Well, he has to pay for the. I mean, you're viewing it as though he trapped the animal and there's a benefit for him having the result. I'm viewing it as he made an avera, he did a violation, and he has to both pay and deal with the carcass of the animal, whatever that may be.
Okay, now the carcass is worth money. It's worth $20.
Okay, so then maybe he pays 80.
Okay, so another
Yeah.
thing we're gonna have to investigate, okay? We have to investigate if he pays 100, and if he pays 100, then he should get the dead animal because he paid for the whole replacement of the damage. Or maybe he only pays 80 and the original owner has to get a coupon, whatever you want to call it, back for that 20. These are all questions that we're going to have to discuss, and the Gemara does discuss them.